We are calling this our Battle for the Border special because we do not talk enough about the border here in the United States of America. Nobody does. We are never going to let off it because our sovereignty matters. We have a retired Border Patrol chief. We have Brandon Darby. We have all kinds of good stuff for you coming up right now on I'm Right. Donald Trump is president of the United States. I know, that's breaking news. I'm here to give you all the information you don't already know. And do you know why Donald Trump is president of the United States? I mean, there's a lot of things to it. A great campaign, he gives a good speech, so on and so forth. Donald Trump is president of the United States for one major reason. He's one of the only presidential candidates in recent memory to pay a lot of attention to the border, to pay a lot of attention to the problems of illegal immigration. And this is what has happened in the United States of America today. The left, because they control all the media, because they control Hollywood, because they control the education system, they have taken control of the language around illegal immigration. Anything you criticize is racist. You're not allowed to say that. That's prejudice. You're bigoted. Ladies and gentlemen, do not let them do that to you. Never let them tell you that protecting your own nation's sovereignty is bigoted. You are a citizen of the United States of America. That is a wonderful thing. You are blessed by God to have it, and you don't just let politicians just toss that away and hand it out willy-nilly just because they want to try to buy some votes. Ladies and gentlemen, this country is worth protecting. Do you know why you have standards for who you let in your home? If you get a knock at the door tonight, and you open it up and there's some crooked-looking dude with a neck tattoo standing there, are you going to invite him in to dine with you and your kids? No, you're not. You know why? Because you care about your home. You have standards for who you let in your home. You have standards for who you want in your kids' school. You have standards for every single thing in your life that you care about, so have some standards for the United States of America. Yes, this is a wonderful country. Yes, we want to always be a welcoming place, but that does not mean we are the world's open sewer where you can just dump everything you want on us, because then we cease becoming the United States of America. We turn into a third world dump. Well, again, Donald Trump always took this problem extremely seriously. Here's him talking about it.
Thousands of children are being exploited by ruthless coyotes and vicious cartels and gangs. 1 in 3 women is sexually assaulted on the dangerous journey north. In fact, many loving mothers give their young daughters birth control pills for the long journey up to the United States because they know they may be raped or sexually accosted or assaulted. Nearly 50 migrants a day are being referred for urgent medical care. Vast quantities of lethal narcotics are flooding through our border and into our communities, including meth, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. Drugs kill 78,000 Americans a year and cost our society in excess of $700 billion.
Can you imagine sitting down with your daughter, your teenage daughter, and giving her birth control pills because you're about to embark on a dangerous journey with coyotes into the United States of America, and you know she's going to be assaulted that way? That is unspeakable. But you know what? Let's shift away from that for just a moment, even though that matters a lot. What about the rights of the American people? Yes, it's not only about compassionate, for the illegal immigrant. It's compassion for the American citizen who has every right to demand the best of his country. An American citizen has every single right to demand that his government secures his border. And why isn't it secure? Let me tell you why our border isn't secure. Because they don't want it secure. We are the wealthiest, most powerful nation in the history of the world. If you really believe we lack the ability to stop a bunch of illegal immigrants from crossing our border, well, then I've got some oceanfront property in Arizona I would love to sell you. Of course they could secure the border. They don't want to. And the problem is this extends to both parties. Now, I love slapping around Democrats, and I'm going to do that a lot here on this show, but the truth of the matter is the GOP, when they've had complete control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, you know what they've done about the border? Nothing. Not much. Definitely not before Donald Trump came along. They want it open because gigantic corporations, gigantic GOP donors, they want the cheap labor, and Democrats, they want the votes. Here's Trump talking about it.
But the greatest betrayal committed by the Democrats is their support for open borders. And these open borders would overwhelm schools and hospitals, drain public services, and flood communities with poisonous drugs. Democrat lawmakers care more about illegal aliens than they care about their own constituents. They put foreign citizens before American citizens. We're not going to do that.
He's right, they do. And we all remember that horrible moment on the Democrat debate stage in their presidential primary debates when they were asked, who here believes that the United States should provide free medical care to illegal immigrants? Every single candidate raised their hands. A shocking, shocking moment. Even Democrats like Bill Clinton wouldn't have dreamed of doing something so radical. But this Democrat Party has completely lost its mind. What does it help us? What does illegal immigration help us? It doesn't help us at all. And I'll tell you what, do you think we're being negatively harmed in any way by having a third world country bordering us? Yes. Now, we can't change Mexico. We can do some things to help, which we've done, especially the passage of the USMCA. But the truth of the matter is we are always going to pay a price for sharing a border with a failed narco state. And keep in mind, less than half of the illegal immigrants currently coming into the United States of America are actually Mexicans. So many of them come from places like Guatemala, come from places like El Salvador, Honduras, places where Mexico is a booming metropolis compared to them. War-torn places. We have horrible gangs like MS-13 pouring into the country, torturing, killing, raping American citizens right here in the United States of America. It is a very, very, very big deal. And the sad part is all these policymakers, all these politicians who decide they want the border open, they all live behind high walls and these lovely brick house, townhome, $1 million neighborhoods with a cop every 15 feet, or they have bodyguards, or they have both. They're never negatively affected by it. Somebody once said if illegal immigrants were taking the jobs of politicians and media members, you'd be able to see that border wall from outer space. It's 100% right. They don't care because they don't care about blue-collar workers. And that's the bottom line. It is time to do something more about the border. We are about to bring on Brandon Darby. Many of you know Brandon Darby. He is the managing editor of Breitbart Texas. He knows more about the cartels and the conditions in Mexico, frankly, than anybody I've ever talked to in my life. At one point in time, actually multiple times, Brandon Darby, because the cartels want to kill this man, has had to go into Mexico in the trunk of a car to speak with sources. Do you think that's maybe somebody you want to stick around and hear? Yeah, I thought so. We'll be right back with Brandon Darby. Hang on. Welcome back to our Border Battle special here. Joining me now is Managing Director and Editor-in-Chief of Breitbart Texas, the one, the only Brandon Darby, friend of mine. Brandon, first of all, a bit of a general question, and this may be a tough one to answer. What's wrong with Mexico? And I mean it by this. This is what I mean by that. I look at the country of Mexico and I see endless natural resources. I see, for the most part, wonderful people, great food, great beer, just a vacation, a tourist destination, a country that by all means, in my opinion, should be a superpower, should be thriving. And yet they're half controlled by drug cartels. They can't ever get out of their way in the corruption. What's wrong, if you had to describe it?
Well, I think the simplest sentence to offer is they lack rule of law. That's the basic bottom line of, the cartels stem from the corruption, stem from the lack of economic opportunity. They are a very wealthy nation when it comes to natural resources. So what is wrong? Well, what is wrong is that they lack the rule of law. Corruption is rampant. It does pave the way for drug cartels. It paves the way for the things that lead to drug cartels, which is a lack of economic opportunity and a lack of justice for people who commit crimes. So it's a lack of rule of law. That's one of the problems we have in this country, is that when we don't, much of what we have is based upon us being a nation of laws, right? Even though it's imperfect, it's not perfect, it's far from perfect. But in general, if you do crime here, regardless of who you are, you can be held accountable. In Mexico, if you do crime and you pay the right governor or the right city official, you are not held accountable, which allows really bad people to thrive, which in turn perpetuates a system of corruption. So in short, the problem is, the very root of the problem is corruption, which stems from a lack of rule of law.
And it's very difficult to reform a situation like that. You end up getting yourself killed, anybody who actually tries to reform things, because systems tend to buck people who try to fight the system, do they not?
Well, if by tend to buck, you mean people get murdered routinely?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
in the last election cycle in Mexico, I believe over 100 politicians were murdered in that year. I mean, this is what happens when you're a prosecutor and you step out of line and you try to go after a bad guy, you get murdered. Your family gets murdered. When you're a journalist and you write about politicians and business leaders taking money from cartels, you get murdered. So one of the problems we have as a nation right now is several of our political leaders are trying to declare certain factions, not all cartels, but certain factions of certain cartels as foreign terror organizations, which would actually allow us to aggressively go after those groups and make examples of them. But one of the problems is those cartels operate in areas where a lot of U.S. companies have manufacturing plants or manufacturing subsidiaries. And so they pay money to the cartel for protection. So if we were to declare them as, say, the Zetas as a foreign terror org, or the Reynosa faction of the Gulf cartel, you're looking at some 300 U.S. companies, very prominent ones, who rely on manufacturing in the Gulf cartel Reynosa faction's territory. So they have to pay money to the Gulf cartel, even if they do it indirectly, and they do it through security companies. They're paying money to be there, and they're paying money for protection. So now all of a sudden they would be giving material support to a foreign terror org. So they're opposing it with all they can, and their minions in the Senate and their minions in the House are opposing it, and they want to keep the status quo. So ultimately, in the situation that Mexico's in, either people in the U.S. are going to do something and exert influence to change it, or it's just going to keep spreading and getting worse and keep spreading into our country.
This is unbelievable, Brendan. This is the first time I've heard this before. So let me see if I understand this right. And I'm not going to ask you to name any of the companies, but so a major United States corporation has moved its operation for whatever reason, I'm sure, costs, down to Mexico. They now pay off the cartels in the same way the mafia still runs, well, used to run, or still runs protection rackets in the United States of America. Nice manufacturing plant you've got here. I hate to see anything happen to it type thing.
Right. So what happens is that, especially with the Reynosa faction of the Gulf cartel, is they make a lot of their money from pesos. They make a lot of their money from protection money. And they say, hey, you're going to pay us to operate in our turf. You're going to pay us to send things across that border, or else unfortunate things are going to happen to them. So what the U.S. companies do is they don't pay directly. What they do is they pay a security company, and then the security company handles keeping everything secure with their budget. The same thing with U.S. media outlets. When we go into Mexico, when we go into Reynosa, we go in and we don't have any protection. We're taking a chance. Most U.S. outlets go and they pay a guide, and that guide tells them what they can and can't say. So they'll pay the guide $1,500 for 2 days, and the guide says, here's what you can and can't say. And then the guide gives most of that money to the Gulf cartel. So they're actually paying the cartel to go and for protection to ride in their territory. And then they don't put that in their news articles. They just say, oh, it's okay that we paid a guide. Well, that's what's happening here. So a lot of groups are affected. A lot of the moneyed groups, the elite groups, are affected by us going after Mexican cartels. And so if we don't go after Mexican cartels, we've already established that people in Mexico really can't go after Mexican cartels without outside help, right? So we have a problem, and nothing's changing. Like when I first started writing about this, there were, a decade ago roughly, there were maybe 2 states in Mexico that were under heavy control from drug cartels in an overt fashion. Now there's over 16 or 17, which is half or more of the nation. So it's getting worse. The violence is getting worse. The control is getting more aggressive and worse. The number of journalists murdered continues to increase. Politicians who try to reform are getting murdered, and no one cares. And now we have civilians getting murdered by groups who historically have tried to keep their violence just among themselves and with other drug cartels. So things are getting worse, and they're not getting better. And the U.S. response really hasn't changed much. If we look at what happened during the Obama administration, what's happening during the Trump administration, when it comes to actually how our State Department deals with Mexican cartels, it's just really not that much different.
What's the current state of the Mexican government? And I ask because of this. I understand that still, the Mexican government, but what you just described, I mean, a U.S. company having to pay protection, a journalist having to pay protection, and then being told what they can or cannot write. To use a military term, what you just described, that's operational control. You're saying a cartel has operational control over certain areas of the country. What's the Mexican government doing?
Well, various cartels have operational control over different places. So if we talk about them as drug cartels, it kind of sanitizes it, and I do that myself. It's just for simple and for ease, right, of conversation. But what we have is we have paramilitary organizations who operate on a transnational level, who have heavy machinery, have armored vehicles, who have all the weaponry. They have Russian RPGs, and they control portions of Mexico. So especially along our border, we just published a piece about 2 hours ago on Breitbart, and it's videos of the Gulf cartel, their paramilitary convoys patrolling near the U.S.-Mexico border in Mexico. I mean, imagine if in the United States, if a group could have 30 vehicles of armored vehicles, 30 armored vehicles, a convoy of 30 armored vehicles with heavy weaponry patrolling parts of our country. Well, we would say that we've lost control as a nation of that territory. And that's what's happened in much of Mexico.
What's the relationship the transnational criminal groups have with American organized crime? Not just the mafia, all organized crime groups that operate here, everything from the Mexican mafia to the Russian mob to the various organized crime groups that we have here that everybody knows we have. Is it an adversarial relationship, or do they work together? Are they buddy-buddy? What is it like?
Well, they work together. So it depends on where we're talking about. So if we look at what can be proven, right? Like what is not just in the halls of intelligence agencies or law enforcement intel divisions, but what's in the public. We know that when the Sinaloa cartel had a meth house in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, sorry, in Minnesota, in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the meth house was robbed, they hired several people from MS-13 in Los Angeles to fly up there, and they ended up torturing several teenagers who were riding bikes by there, right, to figure out what happened, who had been there. So we know that. We know that oftentimes when Aryan Brotherhood members in Texas are arrested with large amounts of methamphetamine, it turns out to be Gulf cartel methamphetamine, right? We know that in El Paso, Texas, La Línea and the Juarez cartel and Barrio Azteca, which is a U.S. gang, right, makes up an armed faction, or made up an armed faction for the Juarez cartel. So U.S. prison gangs primarily act as foot soldiers in the United States. U.S.-based prison gangs act as foot soldiers for Mexican cartels. So they very frequently utilize U.S. gangs and criminal networks to do their bidding, which makes them a part of that cartel. They might not be a made man or a member, but if you are the faction of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas running methamphetamine for the Gulf cartel, you are in fact working with the cartel, right? So that's the problem. One of the problems is that they're heavily reliant upon U.S. people. When we see large-scale meth busts in the United States, what we largely see is a number of U.S. gang members, and then we'll see 2 Mexican nationals. Well, those 2 Mexican nationals are the cartel members, who came to oversee the U.S. operations that were largely run by U.S. citizens and U.S. gangs.
Well, I guess that answers my next question. I was going to ask, do these gangs know that they're working for the cartels, or they just know they get money and drugs from somewhere? But I guess they clearly know, right?
They know, yeah. They're usually, like I said, when you see large-scale methamphetamine operations busted, a lot of the meth that Mexican cartels sell in the United States is actually manufactured in the United States. Not all of it, and probably not most of it, but a lot of it is manufactured here. And so what you see is when you see these large-scale meth production rings busted, you'll see there's always 2 Mexican nationals and 15 or 17 U.S. citizens. And that's the tendency. That's what they do. And they know very well that they're working with Mexican cartels. Yeah.
Man alive. Managing Director, Editor-in-Chief of Breitbart Texas, Brandon Darby, thank you so much for giving us some time today. That was fascinating, man.
Thank you.
Coming right up, we'll have more border battle stuff for you. You get all the best stuff on this show. Why? Because it's my show. Hang on. Well, before I get to Mike Fisher, retired U.S. Border Patrol Chief Mike Fisher, I want you to take a look at this line of illegal immigrants celebrating the fact that they now get driver's licenses in New York under their new green light bill. Look at this. Mike, I have to be honest, and first of all, thank you for joining me. I see that and it makes my blood absolutely boil, that kind of abuse of our sovereignty, that kind of abuse of the United States of America. What does a career Border Patrol guy like you think when you see something like that?
Well, it's very frustrating. Clearly, when you have a population that's in this country illegally, and there's challenges between the federal laws and the state laws, I think that only leads to more confusion and potential danger down the road as it relates to being able to track and find people.
I understand that you obviously spent quite a bit of time in the Border Patrol. What is a daily life like for the U.S. Border Patrol for an Asian? What is he doing? I think people have this, they have this misconception they're all just standing at a checkpoint somewhere. What are they doing?
Well, it's a very challenging career and it's a very rewarding career. Typically, Border Patrol agents, depending upon where they're assigned along the borders, either on the northern border or the southern border or on the coastal borders, they have opportunities to work traffic like many highway patrolmen. They, in most locations in, say, for instance, Arizona, South Texas, they are responding to sensors, whether they're unattended ground sensors or following leads from radar feeds and tracking people through very difficult terrain. Oftentimes rescuing those individuals because it is very dangerous to cross into the country illegally. What I found throughout my 30-year career that typically there were no 2 days alike. Every day presented a unique challenge and an opportunity. And it's a very dangerous job. And I think many people should realize that regardless of what they hear or see on TV, the job that the men and women do each and every day is very dangerous and it's very worthwhile. Protecting this country, I think, is very worthwhile career, and I thank them each and every day for doing that.
Mike, 30 years. Why? What made you start that? Obviously, you went into it and stayed into it for some reason. What was it?
One, I just love the job. I've always wanted to get into law enforcement. I thought growing up that was something that I wanted to do. Really wasn't sure what the Border Patrol was when I came into the organization. And from the time that I went through the academy and entered on duty in my first duty station, I just love the work. I love the camaraderie, and I love the professionalism with each and every agent that I had the opportunity to work with over that career.
What do you see? You mentioned earlier what they see on the news. I can't imagine how many times Mike Fisher must roll his eyes when he sees politicians talking about Border Patrol and things going on the border in the news. What really makes your head explode when you see politicians talk about it from either party?
It was, for many, many years, it was frustrating. Then I recognized that I just kind of tuned that out. It's really unfortunate that it's very difficult to have a legitimate discussion about border security without conflating that with immigration policy. And I think oftentimes, during my congressional testimony or the meetings that I had here in Washington, very too often trying to explain the mission of border security and why that's important to the American people, very quickly delved into a policy discussion on what we should be doing, whether we should detain or not detain people, for instance, while they await their asylum claims. And I understand that that's an important discussion, but it's very difficult to have a meaningful discussion about border security and the impact on national security without getting into an immigration policy debate.
What percentage do you think they do catch? I mean, this was years ago when I was down on the border when I lived in Tucson, and I obviously had some friends in the Border Patrol, and they used to tell me 50%. I don't know whether that number has changed. I'm sure it changes by whichever Border Patrol sector you're in. What percentage do you think they actually catch coming in?
Well, it's very difficult, and I certainly wouldn't hazard a guess. I will tell you that over the years, the Border Patrol as an organization has become a lot more sophisticated in understanding what comes through the border, and of that population, how many people got turned back, for instance, and went back to Mexico. What number perhaps got away, and what number of those individuals that were actually apprehended. We have a better understanding now than when I came in the Border Patrol of the denominator, for instance, how many people are actually flowing through our borders. And a lot of that has to do with the level of technology that we have along the borders now, that we're able to increase situational awareness and have a better sense of what that flow is and where that flow is occurring.
Well, I understand nobody, or no system, I should say, is perfect. Things are probably a bit different from what I understand now under President Trump, who takes this problem a little more seriously than other presidents have. Do the Border Patrol guys have what they need now, or do they have half of what they need? Do they have none of what they need? What do they have?
The Border Patrol today is being resourced better, I think, than throughout our history in the Border Patrol. If you take a look, you had mentioned Tucson or San Diego or South Texas, many of the areas along the border, they have tactical infrastructure that's up, whether it's a fence or a wall. They have improved roads for border access in areas where we couldn't get to before. There are unattended ground sensors, like I mentioned before. There's mobile systems. There's unmanned aerial systems to include large predator drones. So our ability to understand the environment in which we operate is a lot better and a lot clearer, and gives us a better opportunity to deploy resources, redeploy resources throughout a given shift, and be more effective with the resources that we do have.
The drug cartels. I understand that there are obviously a million different drug cartels down there, and they all have their own different corridors. Is there one that's specifically worse or more dangerous than the other?
I think any of the cartels, I mean, there's different reports on, the gang violence that continues to occur in Mexico. I wouldn't necessarily say there's one particular group. I think they all have their own ideologies. They all have their own ways that they operate within the cartel and protecting the plaza, which is, really important to them in order to, either smuggle people or smuggle narcotics into the United States. They're just very, very violent by nature and very dangerous.
The Democrat Party, the National Democrat Party, and look, I don't know which way you lean, but the National Democrat Party, they all raised their hands about giving illegal aliens free health care. I mean, they seem to have morphed into a real open border party. What does this do? Does this create frustration amongst the Border Patrol? Are they so used to politicians lying they just tune it out? Or what does that do for the guys on the ground?
Right. Well, I'm not going to speak for other Border Patrol agents. I will tell you, as a Border Patrol agent, It is frustrating. One is when you're trying to protect the country and trying to limit the amount of people that are coming into the country illegally, when there are pull factors, whether it's policies that you had mentioned or other policies that entice people to come into this country illegally, it makes that job that much harder.
I can imagine it does. You mentioned things are better under President Trump. Were things bad under President Obama or President Bush or President Clinton? You were there for 30 years. Did any of them take it more seriously than the others?
I think throughout the past 2 or 3 decades, each administration has come in with their own policies to reach some very specific objectives. It was challenging, I will tell you, in the previous administration from a policy standpoint. When we started seeing increasing flows of individuals, a lot of that was because we weren't detaining people. And it was very frustrating for Border Patrol agents to go out in a shift, put their lives in danger, make apprehensions of individuals, and then have to release them because the policy was not to hold people. That sent the wrong signal, not just, I think, to the agents, but it sent a signal to those people that were thinking about coming into this country that is, if you get caught by a Border Patrol agent, you're not going to be detained and you can just meld into the population and remain illegal until such time that the government changes its policy or its laws allowing them to enter, such as we've seen in the previous years as it relates to amnesty. So it's very frustrating, I will tell you, as an agent, going through that, and then at the end having to release people on their own recognizance, knowing full well that they were not going to show up for their hearings.
Retired Border Patrol Chief Mike Fisher. Mike, thank you so much. We have a lot more good stuff coming up right now. Joining me now, this is a special treat for me because her and I worked together for quite a while. Amanda Head of America's Voice joins me. Amanda, you live in California, sadly. You should be here in Texas, but you live in California. Tell me about the impact you see of illegal immigration, because I'll tell you, I see it all over the place here.
I will tell you one of the main things I see is that when I'm watching an English network here in LA, the commercials are in Spanish. Obviously, that doesn't really affect me all that much, but you talk about housing prices, homelessness here in Los Angeles, specifically in Hollywood. As you know, I used to live in Hollywood. I now live elsewhere in LA. And when you've got illegal immigrants who the state, the governor, and every single Democrat, it's a supermajority in our state legislature, when you have them prioritizing illegals over everybody else, those are the types of issues that you have to deal with. And first and foremost, it's definitely homelessness.
Oh, I can imagine. Doesn't it seem like so many parts of our country are specifically inviting illegal immigrants into the United States? I guess that's what frustrates me so much. I mean, it's not just that we treat people with compassion when they get here. It's almost as if we have a gigantic open sign telling everybody, please come on in.
Yeah, and I think the best evidence we have of that is the folks who are moving over from Black America who realize that Democrats are now prioritizing illegal immigrants over them. And I would argue that Democrat policies have never really done anything for the Black community other than enslave them with legislation. Might not be shackles and chains, but it's another form of slavery. They're prioritizing illegal immigrants over the Black community, and people are waking up to that and they're realizing it. But from the Democrats' perspective, when they start catching wind that people are smart and they figure out that their policies, their socialist policies, are ultimately down the road, who knows how long it'll take, probably not that long, it's going to destroy America, then they start losing that voter base. So who's next in line? Illegal immigrants. So we got to make sure they're here to vote.
Man, you know what? You're so right, and I try not to be that cynical, but is that the bottom line? I mean, is that all it is? Is they just want more Democrat voters? I mean, that's what it looks like from the outside looking in.
Yeah. When you and I were on air together, you were the resident cynic. And I guess I've slid into that role seamlessly because when you look at shifting demographics, and I've actually done some of these studies lately, or read some of the studies that have been done, these shifting demographics in America and how much that is going to affect the fabric of our country. And when you have legal immigrants, okay, you look at studies of legal immigrant communities and how much they support legal immigration. Well, obviously, it's the complete contrast in the illegal immigrant community. So when you start to bring in these illegal immigrants to vote, they're voting based on their history. They're voting based on how they were treated to get into this country, and they are voting based on which party it was who allowed them to enter illegally. And if we are not careful, and if we do not fix this immigration situation within this administration, like literally before 2024, then as far as I'm concerned, and I know this sounds cynical, I don't know if another Republican will ever win another election.
I don't think it is cynical. We have to deal with reality, Amanda. And look, they can throw out the number. We have 10 million illegal immigrants all they want. I've had people tell me it's 20 or 30 million. Nobody really knows. The bottom line is it's millions. And I find out we have 6,000 employees in ICE, and only 3,000 of those guys are actually deporting anybody. You're asking them to do an insurmountable task.
Yeah, and when you want to put it into dollars and cents terms, even a woman who comes here from, and look, this has nothing to do with me hating Mexico. It's not always Mexico. We've seen this new phenomenon where there are these like pregnancy agencies that bring women from Russia, from China, from Mexico, from El Salvador, who come here and have babies. They don't have health insurance, of course, so it costs the American taxpayer on average $28,000 per baby. When you put it in dollars, and that's not even people who are staying here, that's just people who are coming to have a baby so that their child can have birthright citizenship, which, by the way, a lot of countries had that at one point, and they repealed the crap out of it. Birthright citizenship is absolutely idiotic, and it destroys a country.
It does. It does. And then we have the problem of chain migration. Has Donald Trump actually made any headway in stopping this chain migration problem?
I think, unfortunately, because he has been blockaded legislatively, he's trying to find these little unknown corridors, or previously unknown corridors, to try to ultimately arrive at that location where he can start fixing some of these specific intangible goals within immigration reform. But he's being blocked the whole way. So until we got to get the House back in 2020, we have to. And I've always had this theory that the first 2 years of a presidency are the honeymoon period. The next 2 years, you're spent campaigning for the next 4 years. And then the final 4 years is when you actually get stuff done. So I'm hopeful that we can win back the House, especially with this whole impeachment thing. Democrats, you guys keep going with that. Once we win back the House, then we can finally get some of this stuff fixed.
Fingers crossed. Amanda Head with America's Voice, thank you so much for joining me today. All right, we're not done yet. Hang on. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot reinforce this fact to you enough. Do not let the left, do not let the media shame you into silence about what's actually going on with illegal immigration in the United States of America. And again, everybody knows an immigrant with a great story. Everybody does. And those are wonderful stories. People that come from Cuba and Russia and all over the world, from Mexico, from any place in Europe, that have come here seeking freedom and made a better life for themselves. And those are wonderful stories. We love those stories. But don't let anyone tell you you're not allowed to compare that person's story with the conditions of the illegal immigrants in the United States of America right now, and how they have abused this system on purpose. They abuse it on purpose. And you know what else we never even talk about? We never even talk about anchor babies. People talk about birthright citizenship is in the Constitution. They had no idea that system would be abused like that, or they never would have put it in the United States Constitution. So you know what I mean by anchor babies, ladies and gentlemen? Allow me to clarify. As soon as a woman in Mexico gets pregnant, she hops the border, has the kid in the United States of America. That child is now, according to the U.S. Constitution, an American citizen. The child can even grow up and bring in family members. That happens right here. It is United States law that we give medical care to illegal immigrants. And you can say, well, that's good. We're a compassionate nation, and we should be doing that. And look, maybe that's the case. Do you know what they do? They go to the emergency rooms. Do you know one of the reasons that hospitals are closing all along the southern border? because illegal immigrants walk into the emergency rooms to seek medical care, even for something as basic as a common cold. They know they can't pay. They openly admit they can't pay. So the hospital then has to take that payment through the nose, or they charge you for it, or they go bankrupt. The costs of illegal immigration in the United States of America, the untold, almost incalculable costs, are astronomical. They're astronomical. Look at these illegal immigrants, again, cheering when they find out New York's giving them driver's licenses. Do those seem like somber, people who just came here to have a better life and do things the right way? Don't buy that crap for a second, ever. Yes, many people are, but the people who really want to come to America the right way, they get in line and do it the right way, and they want to come here to become an American. If you walk into the United States of America from wherever, Canada, Mexico, Italy, I don't care what it is, and you still find yourself waving your home country's home flag, then turn around and go back home. If you come here to be an American citizen. All right, that's our Battle for the Border special. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. We'll have a lot more fun again. Later.